Vous ne voulez pas rester là?
Non.
Vous not stay here.
Je n'ai aucune information. Quel genre d'information vous aimeriez avoir?
Est-ce que le président quitte ce pays?
Je crois que c'est pas à moi de poser cette question.
On a vu un camion de militaires là, qui rentrait il y a quelques minutes. C'est pas normal, ça, c'est pas ce qui se fait d'habitude.
Mais non, c'est un endroit où il y a beaucoup de militaires. D'ailleurs, en fait, c'est un aéroport.
Vous attendez rien de spécial ce soir, là?
Mais non.
Mais pourquoi des militaires à cette heure-ci spécifiquement? Ici, nous sommes sécurité de l'aéroport.
En fait, nous faisons partie de la sécurité de l'aéroport. Vous comprenez?
Mais enfin, il y a un peu plus d'animation ce soir que d'habitude.
Je m'excuse, je n'ai aucune information à vous donner, d'accord?
Ok.
Naturellement, la seule chose que je peux vous dire, vous ne pouvez pas rester là à cette heure-ci. Vous comprenez?
Et votre petite voiture,
hein? Non. L'aéroport, c'est un endroit stratégique. Vous comprenez? Vous ne pouvez pas rester là à cette heure-ci, d'accord?
Est-ce qu'on peut aller, comme madame responsable, et vous nous donnez un conseil? On vous demande un conseil. Où est-ce qu'on va aller?
Quel conseil vous aimeriez que je vous donne?
Où est-ce qu'on va aller?
Mais où étiez-vous avant?
On était là,
On était là à l'aéroport.
Ah bon, c'est à l'aéroport que vous habitez?
Non, mais on a de forces.
Non, mais on attend ici parce qu'on va informer les gens sur ce qui se passe.
Voilà, mais moi personnellement, je n'ai aucune information à vous donner.
Vous attendez quelque chose de spécial quand même?
Mais non. Quel genre de... de quoi vous voulez parler?
Est-ce que le président Duvalier va partir ce soir? Non mais dites-le, j'ai pas de commentaires.
Monsieur, il ne partait pas ce soir, le président.
Ah bon, on vous a dit que le président part ce soir?
Oh, monsieur, l'info.
Hein?
C'est ce qu'on dit à Washington.
Eh bien, allez demander à la personne qui vous a donné cette information. C'est pas à moi. Vous devez savoir, vous êtes responsable. Ok, je m'excuse. Ok, goodbye. Au revoir.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Président,
Finito.
Le président est en train de partir là. Le président est en train de partir, commandant.
Je vous ai dit non.
On a vu maman Simone qui partait.
Où ça?
Dans la voiture.
C'est de l'hallucination, ça?
Il y a peut-être Théa aussi.
Oui, c'est de l'hallucination. Il y a une illusion d'optique.
Et Aline. En tout cas, elle lui ressemble beaucoup. Qui était là? Comment ouvrir la voiture aussi? Qui était là? On peut le savoir?
Un militaire? Si. Il y a constamment des civils qui passent.
Non, mais là c'était quelqu'un apparemment assuré. C'était des gros militaires. C'était le genre? C'était peut-être Théa. Non, c'est pas Michel.
There's a large car now, heavily armed. Baggage in it. Baggage in it. A lot of baggage.
Look at it. Look at the bag. Back. Watch it.
Mais non, c'est sa mère. Le bonhomme qui sort. Non, c'est
Depuis 8 heures du soir, c'est l'attente devant l'aéroport François Duvalier de Port-au-Prince. C'est aussi l'incrédulité des soldats qui gardent l'aéroport et qui manifestement refusent de croire que le président à vie puisse s'en aller. 23h50, les deux premières voitures. À l'intérieur, nous apercevons sans doute Maman Simone, la mère du président, ou bien Madame Bennett, sa belle-mère, mais aussi Théard, le beau-frère, extrêmement irrité par la présence des journalistes. Minuit 45, deux voitures, avec à leur bord des conseillers d'ambassade américaine. 2 heures du matin, la piste s'allume, un Boeing 727 atterrit. Un quart d'heure plus tard, à nouveau deux voitures, avec Joan Bennett, des enfants, des valises, des tableaux. Une dizaine de minutes après, c'est un C-141 américain qui atterrit à son tour. À 3h30, enfin, le cortège avec Jean-Claude Duvalier et sa femme Michel, cigarette aux lèvres. Voilà, c'est la fin. Duvalier est parti, une page est tournée dans l'histoire d'Haïti. Cette nuit se termine 29 ans d'une des dictatures les plus féroces du monde occidental. Pourquoi un départ aussi rapide alors qu'on pensait que Jean-Claude Duvalier avait repris la situation en main, sans doute en raison des pressions américaines. La situation dans le pays devenait difficile et les Américains ont préféré précéder une explosion possible. Les problèmes, en tout cas, restent devant pour Haïti. En effet, l'opposition n'est pas préparée, le gouvernement de transition aura une tâche difficile et les rancœurs risquent de s'exprimer dans la violence et le sang.
Gonaïves, à 150 km au nord de Port-au-Prince. Entre la cathédrale et le monument à l'indépendance, des milliers de personnes venues de tout Haïti ont répondu à l'appel de l'Église catholique. En 1804, c'est ici qu'a été proclamée l'indépendance d'Haïti, après la défaite des troupes françaises. Le 28 novembre dernier, c'est ici qu'a démarré le mouvement de révolte qui a fait partir Jean-Claude Duvalier. Aujourd'hui, Gonaïves est sacrée capitale de la deuxième indépendance d'Haïti. Une indépendance en bleu et rouge, le drapeau d'Haïti retrouvé après 28 ans de dictature, pendant lesquels avaient flotté sur le pays le noir et le rouge, les couleurs de Duvalier. Derrière cette deuxième indépendance, de nombreux prêtres, comme ce Français, depuis 34 ans dans les campagnes haïtiennes.
C'est une explosion, vous voyez bien, et que maintenant, le peuple qui fête son indépendance, c'est quand même un peuple qui commence à être conscientisé, qui en avait marre de ce régime-là. Duvalier a tout voulu écraser, l'Église, tout ce qui était valeurs humaines, valeurs, il a tout écrasé.
Monseigneur Gaillot, un des premiers à avoir engagé l'Église contre la dictature.
Oui, parce que l'Église catholique a rempli sa mission, qui est une mission de salut intégral de l'homme. Or, la libération de la dictature est partie constitutive du salut intégral de l'homme. Et c'est dans ce sens-là que l'Église est très heureuse de la situation d'aujourd'hui.
Maintenant, vous allez vous effacer devant les partis politiques?
Nous n'avons pas à nous effacer parce que nous n'avons jamais pris la place des partis politiques.
La politique s'épanouit déjà à Gonaïves. On discute durée de mandat présidentiel, constitution, des pétitions circulent contre le nouveau gouvernement.
Le président Duvalier est parti, mais toute la structure duvalieriste est demeure.
Alors que s'achève la messe, les jeunes enterrent symboliquement Jean-Claude Duvalier. Il n'y a pas une semaine que l'ex-président Avier a quitté le pouvoir, et pourtant Haïti semble déjà être un autre pays.
Allez non, allez non. Allez non, allez non. L'armée. Maintenant, le pays est en état de siège. L'armée est en train de disperser les gens. Je pense que c'est pour éviter les actes de sabotage et de pillage. C'est là mon intuition. Je ne sais pas si c'est les leurs. Mais de toute façon, leur acte, comme ils sont en train de prendre de nouvelles dispositions pour le maintien du pays, je ne sais pas s'ils vont continuer avec les mêmes systèmes de Duvalier.
Avec
They were called the Tonton Macoute. The name means boogeymen. A hardcore group of 20,000 Macouts kept the Haitian people in line and the Duvaliers in power.
Duvalier had created a police state in Haiti. The Tonton Macouts, officially known as the Volunteers for National Security, were just like ESS under Hitler. They were given full power. They were only accountable to the presidency. And both Francois and Jean-Claude Duvalier used to tell him in public rallies that you are the backbones of my government. You are entitled to do whatever you want.
For 3 years, Jean-Jacques Honorat ran the Haitian Center for Human Rights in New York. He was thrown out of Haiti in 1980 for criticizing the Duvalier regime. Now back from exile, he believes the Macouts may have killed as many as 100,000 people under Baby Doc.
Murder and denunciation were the instruments of terror. Killing was the only way for the regime to maintain what they call peace and stability, what was labeled, even in the American press, peace and stability. Remember that? That's how you used to call the situation in Haiti, peace and stability, right?
What would you have called it?
Peace and stability, yes, but peace and stability that exists in a cemetery. Haiti was a cemetery.
We went to a graveyard, if you can call it a graveyard, dumping ground for bodies near the towns of Bon Repos and Titayen, where local people told us that the Tonton Macouts had just dumped people that they had killed, disposed of them there.
Well, it was known that Titayen was for dead bodies, for people killed by the Tonton Macouts.
Did the Americans know what was happening here in Haiti? The extent of what was happening, the embassies, the State Department, the White House?
They knew, of course. We've been saying that Haiti was America's best kept secret.
If the countryside was a place of terror for some, it was a land of opportunity for anyone with the Duvaliers and the Macouts behind them. Americans could do big business here if they bought the right friends. Butch Ashton built up a multi-million-dollar string of businesses under the Duvaliers. Large American firms that want to invest hire him for his government connections and his knowledge of how Haiti works.
Our famous Tonton Macouts, quote unquote, were trained by our U.S. Marine Corps, whether we realize it or not, and armed by our United States government as well. We propped up Baby Doc. We kept him in power.
When you say that the Marines trained the Tonton Macoute, what do you mean?
Well, I mean what I said. I'm saying that in 1961-62, we had a U.S. naval mission here that was supposedly training the Army. And at the same time we were training the Army, we were knowingly training the militia, which part of that militia was the Tonton Macoute, but the militia was the Volunteers of Sécurité Nationale. And our weapons, our M1s, our rejected weapons were given to the militia, and our new weapons were given to the Army. And we knew this, and we had actual Marines training these civilians. And anybody that doesn't know this is fooling themselves and not myself, because I was here during that whole period.
The Marines commander later denied knowingly training Macouts. Did you ever see any of the Marines training the Tonton Macoute?
Certainly.
He has seen more of the Macouts than just their training. One of Ashton's many businesses is Haiti Citrus, which grows limes for export to the States. His groves in a place called Bastrac-Tibizet were once used by local farmers to grow their own food. 10 years ago, the peasants leased their land to his company. When the leases expired last year, the trouble began. Father Franz Grandois and other Catholic priests tried to help the peasants when they were renegotiating with Haiti Citrus. But anyone pushing for a better price or their land back came up against the Tonton Macoute. They say the Macouts resorted to torture to enforce the company's terms. What was the arrangement between the Macoute and Haiti Citrus?
They paid the commander every 2 weeks.
Pour faire contrôle,
pour intimider,
to control, to intimidate, to crush, to break any opposition.
There are peasants in that area, as well as the Catholic Church, that say part of your method was to put a commander of the Tonton-Macoute on the payroll and to use the Tonton-Macoutes to enforce your agreement. Did you do that?
Never. There have been people, the mayor of the area, who happened to be a Tonton-Macoute and is a leader of the area, was in fact not on a payroll, but he was on a consultant basis for security in the fields because of outsiders letting their cattle and their horses loose in our fields.
Macoute. The commander came with 40 Macoutes to this area to attack, to seek revenge.
What specifically did they do?
They would take the people, they would take them to prison, they would beat them. They would tie their hands and feet together with rope, like a ball, and beat them.
What did you say to the allegation itself, that you'd hired Tonton-Macoutes to protect your fields?
Absolutely not. Never.
Except this one mayor who was
the mayor, who was a Tonton-Macoute, known Tonton-Macoute, agreed. But he was the mayor. We were aiming at the mayor. We were looking at the judicial system. Now, if part of the judicial system at that time involved Tonton-Macoutes, I don't think we can be responsible for that.
No one has taken responsibility for the Macoutes. After Baby Doc fled, they were formally disbanded, and some were beaten to death by mobs in the streets. Most Macoutes still have their weapons. None has been prosecuted. Last month, while we were there, people were angry at the lack of real change, and when an army captain beat up a taxi driver, that anger exploded. The days of arbitrary arrest and harassment were not over. The new strongmen sent out to keep the peace are called the Leopards, Army shock troops organized by the American military mission in the first years of Baby Doc's rule. The American military attaché at that time told us the Leopard Corps was his idea. The embassy now denies any involvement in their formation.
It was trained by the American military mission. It was equipped by the American military mission. They had the Leopards created as a force to replace the Tonton-Macoutes.
They wanted them to be a counterinsurgency group. At least that's the way it was told to me.
When James Byers got the Haitian government contract to train and equip the Leopards, it was 1971. There was a ban on all direct U.S. military assistance. His Miami firm Aerotrade did privately what the American government would not do publicly. His trainers were all American ex-military men. This is the first time he's talked about the Leopards.
What has happened now is that the Leopards, who are a formal group of soldiers, are now taking the place of the Tonton-Macoute.
Were they a crack unit?
Let me put it this way. They were a hell of a lot better than anything else they ever had down there. But now what they are is Talis-controlled terrorists. And I understand after John Claude left that they showed their true colors and went around killing and beating people. That's not what they were trained for, but that's obviously what they're used for now.
After Baby Doc left, one of the first U.S. aid shipments was new riot gear. The heavy arms started flowing 15 years ago through Aerotrade. What kinds of equipment were you bringing in?
Fully automatic weapons, thousands and thousands of rounds of ammunition, helmets, uniforms, 30 caliber machine guns, 50 caliber machine guns, 20 millimeter rapid fire cannons. We gave them all of this. Well, they didn't even have toothbrushes or shaving equipment or underwear or anything else.
The CIA knew you were doing all this? How intimately? How much they know what you were doing?
Everything. Everything. They got copies of the contracts.
When we asked the CIA about Aerotrade, what are they going to say to us?
Aerotrade who?
And Washington wouldn't give you any trouble about shipping in all those arms to Haiti?
No. What were they going to do with it? The Haitians. They weren't going to attack anybody. Supposedly that stuff was for these so-called threats of invasion, which was ridiculous. But to any nation like that, they're toys. Unfortunately, the so-called toys that we sent and trained the leopards with were used against the people.
He was going to buy something to bring to the kids. But when he get there, on the street, an army guy call him and tell him to come over. He told him, walk. Army car, hold up him, they beat him up.
Leopard's a regular army.
Leopard.
The regime hasn't changed. Only Duvalier is absent.
You don't think these tactics are going to change?
I think they're going to worsen.
The brutality?
Of course, yes.
Why?
Why? Peace and tranquility.
Haitians now refuse to suffer in silence. This leopard victim is paraded for all to see.
If we bring a man like Duvalier in power, and we arm him, and we keep him in power, and then we throw him out, well, I hope we know what we're doing. Because it doesn't make any sense to me. I know one thing. Our U.S. taxpayer is paying for that.
The CIA
divorcee who won the heart of the president for life and changed our country forever. This was Haiti last February, just after the dictator Baby Doc Duvalier fled the country. But what these familiar scenes did not reveal was the extent to which the passions and anger of the Haitian people were focused not just on the dictator, but also on his wife, Michelle Bennett Duvalier.
What? The first lady? She's a bum.
Michelle Bennett, she's a prostitute. She made voodoo to take trouble, and all the time she take marijuana.
Spending money, millions and millions of dollars.
Michelle Bennett, everybody call her is a lesbian.
She was a
lesbian.
She tried to eat all the little children.
For sacrifice.
Okay.
That's what she meant.
By sacrifice.
No charge about the former First Lady seemed too extreme. Throughout the country, chants and lurid songs about Michelle's sex life rang out on the streets. Graffiti and crude drawings appeared on walls. The body of this Tonton Macoute, a hated Duvalier security policeman, was roasted and paraded through the streets of the capital. When we talked to the people who murdered him, they told us that Michelle Duvalier had ordered the man to poison the water supply of the capital, and that they had killed him before he could carry out her order. Who told the Macoute to do that?
Qui est-ce qui dit Macoute pour faire ça? Michelle Bennett. Michelle Bennett.
Oui. But how did it happen that this one woman could have so mobilized the fury of a nation? The story begins 5 years ago in a moment of seeming innocence. June 5th, 1980, in a ceremony so lavish that the Guinness Book of Records lists it as one of the 3 most expensive weddings, Haiti's 28-year-old president for life, Jean-Claude Duvalier, marries Michelle Bennett, a divorcee and mother of 2. If it looked to the world like a grotesque demonstration of extravagance in the poorest country in the hemisphere, to most Haitians watching on television, it was enchanting. A storybook wedding of a king and a queen.
They liked her. They liked the queen. They wanted the queen. They had a queen.
Is that the way she saw herself, as a queen?
I don't think she saw herself as anything less than that.
Bernard Saint-Journet, one of Haiti's leading painters, was a favorite artist and frequent dinner guest of Baby Doc and Michelle.
And she suited the role because she was the first person in those 30 years to understand that show business was the name of the business. And her show business was very well done.
As First Lady, Michelle immediately enlisted Haiti's TV network to promote herself as a champion of the poor, and to solicit contributions for her Michelle Bennett Duvalier Foundation. Every day, the elegant First Lady was featured in scenes like this, launching vaccination campaigns, touring hospitals, giving her heart to the people. It was a powerful image that won over even such a symbol of saintliness as Mother Teresa.
I've seen many people coming, and kings and people, presidents and prime ministers, but I have never seen the poor people being so familiar with their heads of state as they were with her. It was a beautiful lesson for me. I have learned something from you. So, thank you.
She was capable of showing that she could be the very best, and in reality, she displayed that she was the very worst.
Joe Namfi, the brother of the new leader of Haiti, a businessman and perennial insider, he explained that an altogether different First Lady was surfacing inside the palace.
She took over literally this country, and within 1 year, she had kicked out of the palace Jean-Claude's mother. All of Jean-Claude's mother's relatives, 98 of them, were exiled. So she literally went after the Duvaliers with a vengeance. I mean, to literally exert her power.
As president for life, Baby Doc, with his private army of thugs, the Tonton Macoute, ruled Haiti with unchecked brutality. But by all accounts, he was always dominated by his sister and mother. And once Michelle purged them from the palace, she emerged as the unrivaled force behind the throne.
It was dumb, because when Michelle was speaking, and she would shut him up. Yes, she would shut him up.
In the cabinet meeting?
Oh, well, she insulted anybody at any time. Nobody could resist her.
Oblin Jolicoeur, Haiti's omnipresent journalist and gossip columnist, and recently appointed Secretary of State for Information.
Were people afraid of her?
I beg your pardon. She frightened everybody. And people avoided her try to avoid her because if she does not get what she wants, she would cry, she would try to break everything, she would go hysterical.
The system of government that Michelle came to influence so deeply was rooted in corruption. And as First Lady, she demanded a piece of the action for herself and her family. Almost overnight, her father, Ernest Bennett, who was reportedly on the verge of bankruptcy, became a wealthy man. With his daughter in the palace, he paid no export taxes and soon cornered much of the coffee trade. But this was all just a part of the official corruption that had become a way of life in Haiti. The majority of the country's 7 million citizens earn less than $150 a year. And for more than a quarter of a century, the Duvaliers used their power to extort nickels and dimes from every transaction carried out by these desperately poor people. Even U.S. aid shipments were often diverted and sold for profit in the marketplace. By the time of his marriage to Michelle, Baby Doc is said to have amassed a fortune of hundreds of millions of dollars.
He was simply not interested in running a country in a normal way.
What was he interested in?
Money, money, and money.
What about his wife? What was your impression of her?
She was even more greedy than he was himself, because she had to catch up, you see.
When Marc Bazin became Haiti's finance minister in 1982, he quickly became suspect by questioning the national budget, 30% of which, he says, went directly to Baby Doc and Michelle.
So $60 million went for his and her personal use?
Absolutely.
Every year?
Oh, yes. And that was just official open corruption because it was coming out of the budget.
But what about the First Lady's foundation and the millions of dollars she had raised on behalf of the poor?
That was just a cover. Just a cover.
Was she taking a lot of money out of it, you think?
Oh, yes, yes. I believe that was a very important source of income for her.
This scene came to symbolize the blind arrogance of Baby Doc and Michelle's regime. The dictator hurling small change to the poor, while he and his wife extorted hundreds of millions.
Michelle came into the government through the bedroom
and she brought down the government in 5 years through her greed.
Since the 1960s, when he was condemned to death by Papadoc, Ray Joseph, the editor of the Brooklyn-based newspaper The Haiti Observateur, has chronicled the Haitian Revolution. He points to the Pope's visit in March 1983 as the first challenge to Baby Doc and Michelle.
The Pope was going beyond the Duvaliers, standing by him, and telling the Haitian people, I don't agree with what they're doing. We cannot have this scandalous wealth side by side with the abject poverty. Things have got to change. And from that speech of the Pope, the message went out that the Duvalier regime could no longer continue the way it was continuing. It was doing business.
Most every revolution has an event that finally triggers a people to action. Unlikely as it may seem, the incident in Haiti was a television broadcast, shown in squares like this across the country on TVs which the First Lady had installed to show her good works. And what the people of Haiti saw in May of 1984 was this lavish benefit ball which Michelle had organized on behalf of the poor.
Tell me about that $500 plate dinner. What was it like?
Let's say Nero came back and gave a party in 1985 in Haiti. It was Nero. It was it was incredible. It was incredible. The cadence, the champagne that was being offered. I remember that night they didn't give Dom Pérignon, they gave Krug.
Very expensive.
The most goddamn expensive champagne in the world.
Haiti had never seen anything like it. Ministers' wives dressed in Parisian gowns, a jeweler flown in from Paris to present a $30,000 necklace as a door prize.
I watched this and I said to myself, I wonder how they never understood what they were doing to themselves.
What do you mean? What were they doing to themselves?
Well, this party was broadcast live over Television Nationale, the government television.
So when people watched this ball, I mean, wasn't this a benefit to raise money for
It
poor
was a benefit to raise money, but the clash of that luxury, that display of wealth versus their poverty situation was just too much for anyone to digest.
They have killed all the pigs in the country.
The reaction here in Gonaïves, where people still respond with fury at the memory of that party, was to launch the first demonstration in the history of the Duvalier regime. They protested their hunger and called for the end of the dictatorship. But it wasn't until the following year that Michelle provided a second spark. This one destined to change the country forever. It came 6 months ago, at a time when Haiti was on the verge of bankruptcy, unable even to buy fuel for its trucks and buses, and facing food shortages. It was just at this moment that Michelle and an entourage of 14 set off on a fateful shopping trip to Paris.
And for the first time, people got very angry because Michelle spent $1 million for 1 week and then asked for a $2 million from the governor of the central bank, and she got it. And we understand that she spent $1.7 million.
On what?
On clothes, on paintings, on fur coats, and also refrigerator for the fur coats.
A refrigerator for the fur coats?
Yes, freezers. Didn't you hear what happened when Michelle went back to Haiti with all these furs that she bought abroad? That's not the first time she's bought furs. She has special parties for her friends who also have furs. And Haiti is a tropical country. So at that point, they turn on a special room, very cold, like a freezer, really, so they can put on their furs. That actually happens.
In the palace?
In the palace.
Is it really possible that a shopping spree could have ignited a revolution?
The shopping spree was the spark.
Newsmen to a waiting U.S. Air Force jet that flew them to exile in France. They had managed to get an estimated $800 million out of the country. leaving behind less than $500,000 in the treasury.
John Claude and Michel Bennett, take all money in Haiti. We have to give the money back. We have to freeze them and bring them back to our people. Over here, all of us. These Americans. All of us, brother. Very good people.
In Haiti, people's anger was reduced to acts of symbolic vengeance. But in New York, Michel's brother was attacked in the streets, and in Paris, the Duvalier's financial advisor was beaten and hospitalized.
So what happens now to Baby Doc and Michel? They're safe in the south of France with much of the wealth of Haiti at their disposal. Is this where it all ends?
It cannot end there. We intend to pursue the Duvaliers to the ends of the earth, to bring back the wealth of the country. And we're giving them notice that wherever they go, no matter how long it takes, we will get the money back.
The new Haitian government is now trying to extradite the Duvaliers from France. The French government has put Baby Doc and Michel under a kind of house arrest and has asked them to leave. But no other country in the world is willing to grant them asylum. Meanwhile, the Swiss have frozen all...
The middle. In one incident, a man with machete wounds was brought to a U.S. medical facility. Then Aristide supporters went after the police official who wounded him. He hid in a latrine. As he emerged covered in excrement, the crowd threw rocks. Police dispersed them with tear gas. A young boy was seriously wounded. Though U.S. troops broadcast daily messages and toss leaflets urging all sides to remain calm, this mission could become risky business.
Nation of Haiti.
It's nice to know that we're doing something good for these people anyways, keeping people from getting beat on or killed or whatever the case may be.
Yogi Berra would have called it deja vu all over again. The United States, the colossus to the north, had used its overwhelming military and political strength to intervene once again in the affairs of a Caribbean neighbor. The U.S. has used Teddy Roosevelt's big stick repeatedly in the region, sending its troops into Nicaragua and Honduras in 1912, then Haiti and the Dominican Republic, where they stayed for years. More recently, the Marines have landed in Grenada and Panama, and now Haiti for the second time. But what do these massive military moves actually accomplish?
Very good. It's a good sign. It means that we will be out of our misery very soon.
Misery and filth are commonplace. An existence made worse by the embargo in a country which even before was the poorest in the Western Hemisphere.
We need to get out of this situation. It's impossible to go on this way.
As American soldiers expanded their control, even the dreaded Port-au-Prince police seemed more reserved, although the citizenry continued to scatter at their arrival.
Because I'm doing my job.
In any case, the taking of the Haitian military base is an especially powerful symbol of the transfer of power from military to civilian rule. Tom Hendrick, Fox News, Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
A station based in Brooklyn, and Professor Carol Charles, a sociologist at Baruch College. Welcome. Okay, had a little trouble with Soleil there.
Radio Soleil.
Radio Soleil. Okay, tell us about Radio Soleil and what's been the reaction from some of your listeners to that station following the intervention of the U.S. into Haiti.
Well, most of the people, they feel like they are betrayed, and they are very upset about the situation in Haiti right now, because when they realized that after 3 years, any agreement was really reached to the return of President Aristide to Haiti, and they feel like very upset, and they didn't like the agreement that was signed recently with between President Jimmy Carter, or former President Jimmy Carter, and the figurehead in Haiti, Aimé Jonassin.
And as an observer, as a native-born Haitian, and an observer of what's going on in Haiti, and a sociologist at Baruch College, what's your opinion?
My opinion tend to be the same, and in terms of that sense of betrayal, particularly when you see that the agreement is basically, in a strong term, looks like a sellout to the militaries. On the other hand, given that, I think there are many ways to redress that.
Well, I think he will step down, and but it's very difficult because they are talking about Cedras leaving power but staying in Haiti. But I feel like the danger is still there. Although Cedras stepped down from power, but if he stays in the country, and the guy is a very rich man, he gained the money, from drugs, and he can manipulate anyone in the country and to create trouble.
You think he should be kicked out of the country?
Definitely, yes.
Him and his followers?
Yes.
And I mean, there is a real problem because when they are saying that people are armed in Haiti, most of the time and generally, the people who are really armed are the people that are backing Cedras, both civilians and military. So the situation is very explosive because even if you are disarming the military, most of their backers are still controlling and are still hiding a lot of harm. So how do you resolve that? And if Cedras is still there, you still have someone around which you can organize a whole new situation that could really challenge or how should I say it, disorganize any attempt for the Aristide government to really start a transition toward democracy. So there is potentially, it's a very explosive situation.
How long do you think the U.S. troops will have to remain there? Or should remain there, since they're there?
Well, it's not,
Do you think it's going to be a long-term situation?
Not really. It's so simple because Cedras was, it was supported by the U.S. government. It was armed by the U.S. government. It was paid by the U.S. government. I think, as quick as possible, they can remove him from power, and the troops, the American troops, will leave Haiti. And I would see, I don't mind if the UN troops stay in Haiti to put, control and bring order and to make law and order respected in Haiti. Right, but I don't think the U.S. troops, will stay long.
Right, but the time we have left, just very briefly, what do you think is going to be the solution?
The solution, Aristide will be back and Cedras will step down and he will leave the country.
I will say the same, and I hope that people, again, can re-enter the political space and make, and Haiti can change for the better for the majority of the people.
Okay.
May be stormed as some have been in other parts of this country. But for the most part, in the capital Port-au-Prince, the situation is calm. You can imagine that the reaction to President Clinton calling for a lifting of the embargo is going to go down very, very well indeed. Most people here have been talking about nothing but a lifting of the sanctions. Life here is miserable for people from the top to the bottom of society. There are, on the other hand, still skeptics, people who don't believe the sanctions should be lifted until the military leaders step down. Today, a group of people, a group of exiles, took their chance coming back to test whether this new mood of democracy was going to take hold. They are Haitian boat people. 221 Haitian boat people who fled over the past few months were returned by a U.S. Coast Guard cutter. They came from Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. They arrived at the port at about 1 p.m. this afternoon. They were greeted by the U.S. Force Commander General Shelton and the U.S. Ambassador William Swing. They came holding little pieces of paper which they were going to turn in for $15 US, the price of their travel from the port to their places of residence. They hope and they say that the U.S. presence here will give them more security. They look forward to the return of Aristide. They say that they came back voluntarily, and the U.S. is hoping that...
This morning by soldiers of the 10th Mountain Division. They surrounded the Parliament building. They manned the rooftops. They knew exactly who was to be let inside and who was to be kept out. Legislators who've been in hiding or in exile were welcomed for the first time in 3 years. A group of 12 was flown in from the United States, but those elected since the coup were not invited. All around the building, a street-side convention was in progress. The people left no doubts as to which politicians they liked, Aristide supporters, and which they didn't like, disciples of the regime. Amnesty was the issue of the day. According to the Carter deal,
Parliament would consider granting amnesty. Off free, an Aristide supporter said, there will be no justice in our country. They had a quorum, they began a debate, but after 40 minutes they adjourned for the day. Meanwhile, outside, another kind of political activity was in progress. Shots rang out. Soldiers took cover, prepared to return fire.
Get down!
Get out! They sent a patrol to check it out. A man had been shot in the neck. He was critically wounded, but the Americans did not want to take him away.
Back on! Back on!
Eyewitnesses said Aristide supporters had marched towards the headquarters of FRAP, a right-wing paramilitary organization. FRAP members opened fire on the crowd and did not seem repentant. Police found clubs with nails inside their headquarters. This is how one political party deals with its opposition. But just a few blocks away, democracy was having a modest beginning in a country which has had very few happy endings. Bob Simon, CBS News, Port-au-Prince.
Mes soucis sont divers.
My concerns are many.
Il y a d'abord cette situation anarchique qui s'est développée
this anarchy that is developing
dans la partie nord du pays,
in the northern part of the country,
où l'armée n'a pas un seul représentant.
Where the armed forces don't have one representative right now.
Is it your position that the United States is attempting to meet the Carter Agreement, or that it is not really attempting to live up to the Carter Agreement?
The accord was signed to avoid violence,
pour éviter l'effusion de sang,
to avoid bloodshed,
et pour promouvoir la paix.
And to promote peace.
C'est ce que nous espérions.
This is what we hoped. But in Port-au-Prince and in the northern part of the country, we have more and more scenes of violence. There's looting and there's food depots that are being looted by mobs.
What if the Parliament does not agree to amnesty? What would you do?
J'espère bien qu'ils arriveront à le faire.
I hope the Parliament will be able to pass the amnesty laws.
Mais généralement, la mentalité, l'état d'esprit des militaires haïtiens.
But in general, the state of mind of the Haitian military personnel right now is that they don't believe very much in the value of that amnesty law.
General, you have told me before, number one, that you will step down as leader of the Haitian military on or before October 15th. Does that remain your position?
Oui, ça n'a pas changé.
My position has not changed.
And General, you've also told me before that you do not intend to leave Haiti, that indeed you are determined to stay in Haiti. Has your position on that changed?
Non, ça n'a pas changé.
That hasn't changed either.
General Cedras also said he is concerned about the potential for violence during marches and protests planned, he says, by Aristide people for Friday. That's the third anniversary of the Haitian military coup that ousted President Aristide. As he has been doing for weeks, Aristide declined today to be interviewed by CBS News. He is still in the United States. Connie?
Right now, this as Haitian police and Haitian security forces simply are not apparent, are simply not doing their job as security, and Americans who are on hand are not stopping the looting. CNN's Richard Blystone has been monitoring today's events and has this report.
For troops who are not supposed to be Haiti's policemen, they were doing a pretty good imitation.
Drop the knife! Drop the knife! Put it down!
And plans to contain and protect an expected mass demonstration gave way to a day of putting down brushfire violence. After gunfire broke out at headquarters of a right-wing group called FRAP, and a pro-Aristide mob set to beating up men they accused of being FRAP paramilitary gunmen, it was not Haitian police, but Americans who arrived to restore a semblance of order. And there were no Haitian uniforms in sight when U.S. military policemen, using crowd control spray, moved another mob back from a food warehouse where hundreds had broken in and were looting and fighting over the spoils. Earlier, Ambassador William Swing said U.S. troops were to be only the outer ring around the demonstration that didn't happen.
The essential plan is for our troops to form a cordon and to keep the responsibility for acts of criminality on the shoulders of the Haitian police.
At Port-au-Prince Cathedral, looking back at 3 years of military rule, but also forward. We want a democracy built with love, said this priest. We're waiting for the military to confess their crimes, and then we will forgive them. Tens of thousands had been expected to gather here for a march supporting President Aristide. But in the event, the cathedral was not even full. Whether out of lack of interest in the peace message or fear of more violence like yesterday's, only the absent knew. The anti-Aristide messages that have been pouring out of state television and radio stopped abruptly early Friday when U.S. troops took over the National Broadcasting Center. The violent scenes of the last 2 days have all been within about 2 kilometers in Port-au-Prince. Elsewhere, the U.S. effort to build security goes on. Thursday at Jacmel on the south coast, U.S. Special Forces moved in to share living quarters with Haitian soldiers. The city was tranquil. The center where the right-wing group called FRAP had administered beatings was deserted. Both Haitians and Americans said they were determined to cooperate. Richard Blystone, CNN, Port-au-Prince.
And we've just heard word from our correspondent Lucia Newman on the scene of the looting that's going on right now, that apparently U.S. military police have fired in the air to disperse the crowd. We are hoping to get details, but this, as a military spokesperson earlier today, said that the U.S. could not be the police force here.
Our mission was...
The military in the briefing today sent a message to journalists about perhaps getting in the way sometimes.
Well, I think the U.S. military has always felt that journalists get in the way. For the most part, we are responsible, we try to keep away, and we try to let them get on with their job.
You're projected 15,000 to now more than 20,000. The White House insists Mr. Clinton is not micromanaging the military operation, but says troop levels may have topped off with some forces ready to start leaving next week. Press Secretary Dee Dee Myers sought to put the situation in context. Of mission creep. On Capitol Hill, critics continue pressing for an early withdrawal.
We're seeing the mission creep now, I'm afraid.
Haitian radio and TV stations, and is now broadcasting statements by exiled President Jean-Bertrand Aristide in Washington calling for calm.
I taped a message this morning in Creole asking people to move towards reconciliation, not violence. And we continue clearly saying neither violence nor vengeance.
Meanwhile, sources say Port-au-Prince Police Chief Joseph Michel Francois is now preparing to leave Haiti for the Dominican Republic, where his family has already fled. Clinton administration officials continue to predict the other main military leaders, Raoul Cedras and Philippe Biambi, will also eventually see the handwriting on the wall and leave the country as well, despite their public statements promising to remain. Bernie?
Operation in Haiti could come when President Aristide returns home. But some are asking, how will Aristide remain safe when so many of his armed enemies are on the loose? CNN Special Assignment correspondent Brian Barger has looked at how the United States plans to protect Haiti's democratically elected president.
On the streets of Haiti, exiled President Jean-Bertrand Aristide is hailed as a savior. But behind the scenes of jubilation, U.S. intelligence officials are concerned about hundreds of heavily armed men, in and out of uniform, awaiting vengeance.
There's a great deal of hatred towards Aristide as the symbol now, I think, of the destruction of the military. Perhaps there's a belief that if he were assassinated, then what he stands for would also be severely damaged.
To protect Haiti's president, the State Department says it is now training a 60-man bodyguard contingent. For backup, U.S. security experts are being hired to support and further train Aristide's bodyguards. U.S. intelligence will also play a role, according to officials. A $5 million CIA covert action plan calls for efforts to neutralize Haiti's paramilitary groups, the attachés.
Attachés are basically armed thugs who are licensed by the military, issued with an identity card and a small payment, to operate as auxiliaries to the police in intimidating the population, essentially.
The U.S. military and international police monitors soon to be deployed in Haiti will be trying to keep Haiti's military in check. to prevent them from mounting yet another coup against Haiti's first democratically elected president. U.S. officials are clear that